Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Becky Robin. I'm excited to be with you for another book marketing webinar. And if you're coming in today, I would love to invite you to go ahead and talk to us in the chat. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. So if you can take a moment to say hello, we're going to get started with our content and an introduction of a new webinar helper in just a few minutes. So welcome to those who are joining. I'm in Michigan today where we finally have some cooler weather after 90+ degrees for months and months. So now that a few more of you are here, I want to take a moment to introduce one of our newest team members at Weaving Influence. This is Megan Maldonado. Megan, where are you calling in from today?
Hi, everyone. I am calling in from Houston, Texas today.
Awesome. Well, Megan, thank you so much for being here. Megan will be your chat host on this webinar and many upcoming webinars, and we're really thrilled to have her here. Today's topic, as I mentioned, is network mobilization. And as we get started, I'm curious to hear about your own thoughts, questions as it relates to network mobilization. And I do have a couple of polls to engage you, but I'm going to take a quick look at our attendees. Welcome, Bill. Welcome, Jackie. Welcome, Jim. Welcome, Mary. I see some friends of the house. Welcome, Sharon. Welcome, Tova. It's great to see all of you again. So let's take a look at the polls that I have for you today, so that we can get a sense of how everyone is feeling. There are actually two questions on this poll, and I'd love to have your feedback. So the first question is, I guess it's like agree or disagree. I am uncomfortable asking for help in marketing my book. Yes, no, or somewhat. And the second question is, if you have a book already, how comfortable are you with asking people to buy your book? So I am uncomfortable asking people to buy my book. Again, you can say yes, no, or somewhat. And if you have any comments related to the questions, I would love to see those in the chat as well. And I would encourage you to use that drop-down menu to select everyone so that everyone can see your comments today. And I'm going to give you just a couple of more seconds to answer the question. And I'm encouraged to see that folks, are answering the poll, and here's some results. So it looks like none of you are uncomfortable asking for help in marketing your book, which I'm really glad to hear, because network mobilization is such an important part of any book launch. And there are some of you who are uncomfortable asking people to buy your book, which is understandable, and many times authors are. So a little bit different results on that second question, but thanks to you who took a moment to answer the questions. And I do see that there's a couple of comments in chat. Angelic says, I never thought of how it would feel to ask someone to buy my book, and my gut reaction was, oh no. That's a really interesting comment. And one of the things I tell authors often is that people won't buy your book unless you ask them to. Which if you're an author and you've marketed a book before, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. You think that just saying, hey, I have a book will make everyone go and buy it. But what we've really noticed is that, people have the best intentions. They may tell you they're going to buy your book and then forget to buy it. And staying out there with that ask to buy the book is very important for any author. So I am going to bring up some slides as we dive into our topic today. And, I want to welcome you throughout today's event. Please to put any comments and questions into the chat. Would love to be able to answer your specific questions. And so let's dive in today. So the title of today's webinar is One-to-One and One-to-Many Network Mobilization for Authors. And this is important because as you're launching your book, you'll do both one-to-one outreach and you'll also do one-to-many outreach. And there are some benefits to each. I happen to be at the point of my author journey where I am working on the final edits before I turn in my final draft on Tuesday. And in this stage of my journey, I do have a lot of those one-to-one asks. For example, I am asking for book endorsements, and those are always done one at a time, where you identify the people that you want to endorse your book and you go out to them individually and personally. And I'm also in the process right now of asking for permission for people whose stories I've included in the book. All of that has to be done one at a time. And Obviously, it's much different, the response that you get when you send an individual email. So as we dive in, before we get too far, in case you don't know me, I think most of you do, but in case you don't, I'm Becky Robinson. I'm the founder and CEO of Weaving Influence. I used to have a slide that had my family on the pictures, and then I remembered my husband's a law enforcement officer. We don't like to keep my family photos public out there in the world, and so I took them out. For today, I'm going to show you my two fur babies, my daughter's cat, Philippa, my favorite German Shepherd, Lottie, and then running is a big hobby of mine, and that's my friend Carrie on a run, just so you can know me a little bit better. Also, my book is coming in April of 2022, and I just noticed this is not actually the correct book cover. We changed my subtitle, but this is the general idea. My book, Reach, and the subtitle is now Creating the Biggest Possible Audience for Your Message, Book, or Cause, and my book is coming next April. So why is network mobilization so important? Well, every year, more than 1 million new books are published in the United States alone. And I've been marketing books now for about 10 years. And, across the 10 years that I've been working on marketing books, every year the market gets more and more crowded. Well, why is that? It's because there are more and more books added to Amazon and other online retailers. So it's really difficult for authors to rise above the noise. And the statistic that I've heard is that most new books never sell more than 250 copies in their first year. And so if you want to think about where do those 250 copies come from, it probably comes from the author's closest connections, their friends, their families, their colleagues, or anyone who knows them personally. So if you want to be able to get beyond that 250 mark in terms of book sales, what you have to be able to do is to mobilize interest beyond those people who know you the best. And one of the ways to do that is by tapping into the people who know you. So just a bit of review, if you haven't been on one of my webinars before, I envisioned the book launch process in 4 phases. The first one is building, and that's really the time that you want to build as many contacts and connections to help fuel interest in your book as you can. The second phase is called working, and that's the 4 to 6 months leading up to your launch or publication date, where you do a lot of this network mobilization to help you prepare for launching, which is the month surrounding your publication date. And during that launch month, what you're trying to do is to create as much momentum as possible to get as wide exposure as possible for your book so that your book can become an ongoing asset in the world. And then you go back into what I call the advancing phase, which is keeping your book in the conversation. And that can be for years as your book goes into the backlist. Just an interesting side note, if you look at the data, in the past couple of years, the backlist sales of many books, especially nonfiction books, often overperform and outperform new books. So the reality is, if you can create a book that's of value and you market it over time, you are likely to see more sales as the book moves into what's called the backlist, which would be beyond that first year. And if you look at the top sellers on Amazon, you'll notice that most of the best sellers on Amazon are not new books. They're actually classic books that continue to drive interest. So, getting that great start is really critical. So this graphic represents the one-to-one outreach that you can do as you mobilize your network on behalf of your book. And anytime you write a personal email, it will always be more powerful and more actionable than an email that you're sending to a group. So the most important thing that you can take away today is really making sure, if you are in the process of marketing a new book, that you carve out the necessary time to give personal attention to the people in your network, because the more specific your ask is and the more directed to a person, the more they know that it's personal and coming from you, the more likely they are to follow through. So it's sort of like, if I say to my family after dinner, I could use some help tonight. it's easier for them, to all wander off to their bedrooms and corners. Whereas if I say to my youngest daughter, Maggie, it's your turn to help me with the dishes, she's far more likely to help. And it's the same way with network mobilization. If you put out a broad appeal, hey, I need some help getting the word out about my book, it will be far less actionable than if you have a very specific ask. For example, I could say, Mary, would you buy my book on launch day? Which would be a lot more likely to get a response than just a broad, hey, will you help me get the word out about my book? I often describe a book launch like a wedding because, just like you prepare a long time for a wedding and you spend a lot of time and you spend a lot of money and you plan in advance, when you plan a book launch, if you take the time to plan it out far in advance, it does take a lot of careful arrangements and time, energy, and focus. It's definitely worth it. But one of the reasons why I use the wedding is as an analogy is because if you were going to have a wedding and if you had the resources to invite everyone that you'd like to invite, and if you took the time to brainstorm that wedding invite list, what you would likely find is that the list of people you would add to your invitation list, if money were not an object and travel and all of that, might be some of the very people who could contribute to helping you market your book. And so in a few moments, when I get to the slide, I'm going to show you a spreadsheet that my team and I coach authors to use in planning their network mobilization. But you really want to think about anyone possible in your life who you've known. The older you are, the more kind of past phases of your life that you have to dig into. I am in my 6th decade of life. I just turned 50. So I have 5 decades worth of friends and connections that I can, think through as I plan my book launch. And it really is helpful to think about, are there any childhood friends? Are there any high school friends? Are there any college friends? Are there any people from that first job that you had? For me, I've lived geographically in a lot of different places. So when I'm thinking about my network mobilization, I'm thinking, okay, I have the Michigan years. The last 11 years, our family has been in Michigan. We have our Chicago years. We spent a decade in Chicago before that. Then we have our New York years. We spent about 7 years in Western New York. So really thinking about the people, the organizations, anyone who might be interested in the book that you're writing from the various places that you've lived over time. And, if we're able to return to travel, often those places that you've lived geographically are places that you can return to for book events by bringing people together who you once knew. Lisa Fain is a client who we serve, and she happens now to live in the Seattle area, but she previously lived in Chicago and then had some really strong connections in Phoenix where her parents live. And so prior to the pandemic, she had planned out some Chicago area events, some Phoenix area events, and some Seattle area events. So what I want to invite you to do is just to think about the geography potentially related to your networks as well. And also, of course, to think about the people. So if you happen to be farther than 6 months out from your book launch, or really at any time in your journey, one of the ways that you can prepare to network, use your network effectively, is to create as many connections as possible as far in advance of your book launch as possible. And when I say connections, what I'm referencing are those connections that you build on social media. So if you're thinking about writing a book and it's a year out or 18 months out, what you want to be able to do is add Facebook friends if you're using Facebook, add LinkedIn connections if you're using LinkedIn, add Instagram connections. Sometimes it can feel really, really slow depending on the platform. I currently on Instagram have about 915 people following me, which, isn't a huge number. Although before I signed my book contract, the number was probably more around 600. And over time, my team has been working carefully to get that number up so that when my book comes out, we have more people who could hear about and learn from the book. And so, one kind of task you could give yourself as an actionable takeaway from today's call is to set aside some time each week to add connections on all the social media platforms. And again, to my point about all the various geography of your life or all the various relationship kind of milestones of your life, if you can connect with those people who used to know you, what I have found is that it's so surprising to see the different places where people will be interested that you don't expect it. So this graphic represents how exponentially your network grows as you add more connections on LinkedIn. So even if you have a modest number of 289 connections, LinkedIn through your connections actually helps you to reach more than 10 million people. And so if you look at these numbers, it will all be specific to your connections and how many people they have. But LinkedIn used to give you this cool metric that would show you, how large your network would grow as a result of adding connections. I noticed that there's a question, so I'm going to take a quick moment. I will come back to that question, Kamal, about the best way to host a launch event virtually in the pandemic era. It's a great question. We'll come back to that at the end. I'm not actually managing chat very well. Yes, Catherine, that permissions task is pretty intensive for nonfiction. All right, so this graphic represents the one-to-many outreach that you can do during your book marketing journey. And, this is a pretty self-explanatory. If you have a permission-based email list, you are more likely to be contacting those people on your permission-based list in an automated type way. So you're reaching many people at once with the same message. Let's take a look. So we call those permission-based email contacts. And it is also very important to grow that permission-based list so that you do have the ability to contact people more seamlessly and quickly. And, growing your permission-based email list should be a big priority if you're in that building phase of your book marketing. And so as you think about contacts, you want to think about who is it that's interested in your message, who has opted in, who's given you permission to stay in touch. And of those people who are on your permission-based list, it can be useful to even drill down further to get people to opt in if they're interested in supporting your book, maybe through a launch team or as an ambassador. So typically people will opt in for your email list through a form like this one. This happens to be a grab from our website at some point in time, and we're inviting people to sign up to hear from us. Okay, so let's get really practical. This is a spreadsheet. This is the type of spreadsheet that we use with our clients when we're helping them with network mobilization. And at the beginning of the call, I was talking about the importance of really capturing the names of any people who may be interested in helping to support your book. And it really, starts with opening a blank spreadsheet and brainstorming, brain dumping, as many people as you can. And you can kind of go back and forth. It may be that you have some specific organizations that you've been in touch with over the years, and it may be easier to think about the organizations first and then think about who the people are within those organizations that you know, or it may be better, just to start with individual names. Now, once you have the individual names, if you can carefully organize the contact information, both email address and mailing address if you have it. The mailing address is important because quite often a way to get the word out about your book is to send out advanced copies as a gift to people who may be able to help. The other thing that you want to do is to think about the specific asks if you're doing one-to-one outreach that you can request of people. So for example, my friend Jim McQueen is on this call. He was a client of ours in the past. I know Jim's working on a new book. And so when it comes time for my launch, I might think, okay, Jim is in Alaska. Is there something specific that Jim could do in Alaska that would contribute to my book? And maybe it's only about, word of mouth, telling people he might meet authors in the community about my book. So I might contact Jim and say, hey, Jim, I need some help with my book launch. If I send you 10 business cards with my book cover, would you be willing to give those away to authors and recommend that they buy my book? So that would be a very specific way that I'd be thinking of Jim. And maybe that would be a fit and maybe it wouldn't. Just spitballing. Maybe really the best thing that Jim could do is, buy 5 copies of my book if he had the means to do so. And I could write to Jim and say, hey, Jim, would you consider buying 5 copies of my book and sharing them with other authors that you know or other creators that you know? So Jim, no pressure, by the way, just easy to use you as an example. But no pressure for any of those asks. They're all hypothetical. All right. So one of the good news things I have for you is that after this call, if you're interested in getting a spreadsheet like this one for yourself, we do have a free resource available. When you sign up for the resource, you'll get a Google Doc that you can copy and use, which is our system that we use for network mobilization. I do want to call out a couple of things though. It's helpful to create notes about when you contact people as a way of remembering to follow up with them. So we often will actually add additional columns to this spreadsheet where we'll put multiple dates, for initial contact and follow up. Now you're also going to notice that we have offer here. Now I don't think that network mobilization is at all transactional, but there are times that you reach out to someone for help and there is something very logical that you can give in the process of asking them to help you. And so you might want to think through as you go, are there things that you can do to express appreciation and gratitude or be mutually helpful to the people that you're asking for help from? What I would find is actually it's far better to be as helpful as you can all along the way so that when you come to ask, it feels easy and natural to ask because you've already built up that social capital with people. But, there are times where it makes sense to say, hey, I'm planning a virtual launch event. Would you be willing to be a special guest? And, I'd love to be invited to yours and support yours or whatever that might be. All right. So a couple of pros and cons of these various types of network outreach. So one-to-one outreach is, as I mentioned before, so much more personal, so much more likely to get a response. You can include those more specific asks. You're also opening the door, even if the person isn't able to help, even if they're not able to do that ask that you're making of them, it's still opening a door to that personal connection and interaction and memorability. So, if Jim writes to me and says, hey, Becky, my new book is coming out. Can you buy 10 for your team? And I have to say, hey, Jim, I can't buy 10. I'd be glad to buy 1 and tell me more about what's going on with your book. How are you? How's your health these days? Whatever. So if I get a personal note from Jim, I'm far more likely to engage in that personal interaction with him. Now, the biggest downside of the one-to-one outreach is that it requires a huge investment of time because writing one at a time emails can be hard. Now, a quick trick would be to create a templated email where most of the email is templated, where you take some time to make the specific ask and add the personalization, which can go a lot faster. One difficulty of this one-to-one outreach is it's more difficult to outsource. You can't necessarily hand it to your assistant. Although I will say one of my tricks around this is that when I have a lot of one-to-one outreach to do, I will create a template. I'll give a list of people to an assistant. They will create drafts in my email, and then I go into the drafts, I add the personalization, and I send the emails one at a time, which does make that a lot faster. So there's a pro tip if you happen to have an assistant who's helping you. On one-to-many outreach, you can reach a lot more people faster. You can outsource that or use an automation software like MailChimp. Now, in that one-to-many outreach, by design, the asks are more general. You may have people less likely to open an email if they perceive it to be, part of an email marketing campaign. You do have to have a permission-based email list to be able to send legally to a group of people at once. But one of the benefits of this one-to-many outreach is that it is much easier to outsource. So now we have time for questions. I'm going to first go to the one that came into the chat from Kamal. How's the best way to host a launch event virtually in the pandemic area and leverage multiple geographies? So throughout the pandemic, my team and I have been hosting virtual launch parties with authors, and we've been using Zoom. Typically for a virtual launch party, though, we use the Zoom meeting format rather than the Zoom webinar format because it allows everyone to be on screen. And so if you're interested in some guidance on that, I could send you a resource that we have about planning a virtual launch party. I might even have some links to private YouTube videos of parties we've hosted. It can be a really, really fun experience to bring people together. Now, if you want to leverage multiple geographies, what you may want to do is to have several different launch events to match up with the various time zones that you're trying to meet, or to look for a time that will work across time zones. So I did a virtual launch party for an author, an American expat who was living, I believe, in Switzerland when his book launched. And we ended up doing the party in the evening Eastern time so that he could pick up on the audience on the West Coast and the audience on the East Coast. No, wait, maybe he lived in the Middle East, like in Dubai or something. And he ended up getting up at like 3 a.m, but he knew that the time that we picked would work for Europe and the US. So, you may have to plan more than one event in order to cross geography. I'm so glad, Jim, that you didn't have any pressure from me using you as an example. Jackie has the question, based on that LinkedIn slide that I showed, how do you reach those other professionals that are part of your network that you're connected to through your connections? And it's not easy at all, Jackie, to reach those connections. I mainly use it to illustrate the fact that the people in your network also have their networks. And so part of your network mobilization can be centered around an ask of, would you share about my book with your network? So for example, I have on LinkedIn, I don't know, 5,400 contacts. Now, if I share about my book, LinkedIn's algorithms may allow me to reach only a fraction of my own network. Now, that said, if I ask Mary, who's been a client of ours who's on this call, if Mary also has 4,000 connections on LinkedIn, but they're different from mine, if Mary generously shares my book on her LinkedIn profile, then I might reach a fraction of her network. The main reason why I encourage people to grow an email list as a more important priority than growing their network, for example, on LinkedIn, is because of those algorithms. If I have 20,000 people on my email list, which I do, and I email those 20,000 people, most of them will be delivered and they could be opened and the email could be read. So I can have, assurance that if I send the email out, that most of the people will receive that email. The difference with LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram is that those algorithms are controlling the reach of my content. And I might share my content with my 5,400, LinkedIn connections, and, 100 will see it. Or, on Facebook, our Weaving Influence Facebook page has over 2,000 likes. If you look at the reach of our posts, most are reaching about 30 people. So social media algorithms are not kind to us when we want to reach more people. Tova, I will make sure that the link to the virtual launch kind of plan is in the follow-up email that we're going to send out tomorrow. All right, so I only have a couple of more minutes, unfortunately. Boy, this content, filled a lot more time than I thought. How to develop a reading culture is a really challenging question, Cicely, that I'm not sure I have the time or info to answer at the moment. But that's a good question that I'll give some thought to, and I appreciate you asking it. A couple of follow-up items, and Megan will be putting all of this info in the chat. So if you're interested in getting the network mobilization cheat sheet, it's a free ebook that we've offered, and within it is a link to that spreadsheet that I showed in my slides. If you're interested in getting that, you can follow this link. It will be in the chat to download that network mobilization cheat sheet. Also, we have a very special opportunity coming up in the month of October to learn 10 hours live with me. And maybe that's scary, maybe it's fun. We are hosting the first ever Reach More Readers workshop. It's 2 days, October 14th and 15th. It is virtual. It's from 12 to 5 Eastern time, both days. You can read the whole schedule and sign up and get $100 off by visiting this link. And that link will also be in the chat and in our follow-up email. I would love to see you on the workshop. It will be a small group. It will be in a Zoom meeting format. One of the things that's unique about the workshop is that we're really going to take you through the entire framework that comes from my new book, which is going to give you actionable tips in every single area of book marketing and digital marketing that could be for your book or for your business. We will give you some pre-work to do in advance of the workshop. We'll give you some homework to do after the workshop. And a few weeks after the workshop concludes, we'll also have a 1 hour long Q&A so that after you've had some time to really think through what you learned, if you have additional questions, you'll be able to ask those in the follow-up webinar. The other thing is that when you sign up for the workshop, you also get free access to the course that I created, which is called the Book Marketing Action Guide. And that book marketing action guide takes you through the 4 phases of the book launch journey: building, working, launching, and advancing. And so you're getting just a ton of resources for a very small price tag, and you'll have lifetime access to the course. I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to about the Reach More Readers workshop is the opportunity for authors to network with one another and learn from each other's experiences as well. It will be highly interactive and not so much just presentations. So I hope that answers your question, Jackie. And I think we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for investing with us today. In this learning, we will have this video available in our archives on YouTube, and we'll be back with you with a follow-up email. You know what, Megan, I forgot to check our topic for next month's webinar. We do have an October webinar, a free webinar coming up. Megan, if you happen to know the topic of that October webinar, if you could tell me, and if you don't know, it's fine, because I don't know either, but it will be a great surprise. I hope you'll come back next month. It's sure to be fun. Have a great day, everyone.